morning, and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. Fewer than 10 days now until Connecticut voters can start casting their ballots, with early voting starting October 21st. That's right, 2 full weeks to take advantage before actual election day. And if you want to check your voter registration status now, you can do so online, make any address, party updates, or register for the first time to vote, as long as you do so before the 18th. If not, no worries. You can also do so in person. Joining me now to talk voting expansion, election security, and all our state policy surrounding the polls, Chair of the State Legislature's Government Elections Committee. Thank you so much for being here, State Representative Matt Blumenthal.
Thank you so much for having me.
So obviously we've talked a lot about elections in the past. I think one of the new things on people's minds, as I just mentioned, the legislature passed early voting, finally went through the process to implement it and choose the amount of days. This upcoming election in November, not the first one with early voting, but it'll be the first full presidential and general election with early voting. So really quickly, run me through, if people haven't taken advantage of this before, what do you want them to keep in mind?
Yeah, so people are going to have the first opportunity in Connecticut this year to vote early in person in a general election. We were the 4th to last state to adopt early in-person voting. Not for nothing are we called the land of steady habits, but I'm glad we're finally making this available to the public to make their voice heard. It expands access, and they'll be able to vote starting on October 21st through November 3rd early, and then if they don't vote during that period, they can still vote on Election Day. So we're really hoping that people take advantage of this opportunity. Every municipality has at least one early voting location. You can find it out on the Secretary of State's website or elsewhere online, and I encourage people to utilize it.
And we've heard from the Secretary of the State's office and you know, from some state lawmakers as well, that this was kind of a trial period, this election season that we're in right now, to kind of see if the amount of days work, if the staffing is right, because we know the funding was put in, as you said, to make sure there was at least one location in all municipalities. You know, as the chair of the committee that handles elections in the state legislature, what have you heard from poll workers and maybe even from constituents who have or have not tried out early voting thus far?
So you're exactly right. We wanted to make sure there were a number of opportunities for elections officials to work through the kinks on early voting before the general election, which we're about to enter now. And what I've heard from people who've utilized early voting so far is that it's been a really smooth and a good experience. We've also heard from some elections officials and registrars that it's relatively labor intensive. And that's actually something that's linked into an opportunity to improve things that'll be on their ballot this fall, which is absentee voting for all. We will finally have the opportunity to join the other 36 states and the District of Columbia that allow every eligible voter to vote absentee. We have a siloed and fractured election system between in-person voting and absentee voting. It creates a lot of redundancy. It adds for more labor for our elections officials. If we pass this absentee voting for all ballot question, which will be on everyone's ballot, although maybe on the back side, we will be able to finally adopt a system that works for everyone, is most efficient, both for the voters and for the workers who administer our elections.
And we know that's a big deal. This is something Connecticut obviously does not have, no excuse absentee ballot voting. But obviously, you know, we've seen in the past year some concerns and even some hysteria around election fraud, specifically relating to absentee ballots. Of course, everyone saw what was going on in Bridgeport. It's been, you know, covered and talked about extensively with that mayoral election. And there were some complaints and investigations even before that last year. But a lot of people, I think, still want to know, why should they have faith in Connecticut's election system? They might still have concerns about election security. They might be worried about turning out to the polls. So as they're considering this question, what do you want them to keep in mind about how secure Connecticut's elections are?
Yeah, so there's no doubt that the Bridgeport situation was a black eye for our state and its elections. But the important things to know are, first of all, that fraud and misconduct are very, very rare, and especially the amount of misconduct that may affect an election. And the other thing that they should be aware of is that we've taken strong measures to correct the Bridgeport situation, especially in terms of mandating video surveillance of all drop boxes that's available to the public. speeding up investigations and prosecutions, making sure they're done vigorously, and increasing tracking and other elements of security. This was a bipartisan bill we passed this past session. Another thing they should be aware of is that absentee voting for all will help take care of that security situation. Both of the judges that administered the cases involving those mayoral elections recommended that we adopt a system of absentee voting for all. That's because our complex, narrow system creates lots of opportunities, first of all, for people to be confused or deterred from voting absentee, but also opportunities for unethical operatives to perhaps deceive people into voting when they shouldn't. We want to take away that advantage, make absentee voting accessible to everyone.
Absolutely, and we know, so much of what you and other lawmakers at the state capitol are pushing for is that expansion, making it easier and more accessible for people to vote. But, as we talked about, voter fraud cases are low, but there's obviously still concern because even if it happens one or two times, it gets a lot of attention and people are worried about it. We know that we're also seeing issues, when it comes to mis and disinformation online and technology like AI, which can deter people from voting, make them nervous. I was recently speaking last week with Connecticut's FBI officers in New Haven about what they're doing to try and combat election misinformation. The state legislature had a pretty comprehensive AI bill, which failed last session, but was threatened by a governor's veto, but not really wanting the state to be the first try. But we know a lot of work went into that. Do you think that's something that needs to be potentially brought up again next session, or how do we kind of handle that technology and those issues around elections?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I want to give a lot of credit to Senator James Maroney, who's really led the effort on AI regulation in the state of Connecticut.
Absolutely.
And we worked together. I helped lead through the GAE committee a bill that would regulate and ban deepfakes in elections. That's essentially video purporting to depict a candidate or someone or a person doing something they're not actually doing to deceive the public. Obviously, it's a complex issue, and obviously we're a small state. But there's good news. The state of California recently adopted 18 AI regulatory bills, and the governor signed those 18. There was one other one he didn't sign, but hopefully that should give us some more runway and some breathing room to do some regulation ourselves, because it really is essential that we not let this AI boom get out ahead of us.
Yeah, and you think that kind of gives Connecticut, as you said, a chance. We would no longer be the first state, and next session is a longer one, even though it's a budget session. You think there might be enough time to get that going a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm really hopeful that we'll have an opportunity to work through these issues that we witnessed last session and be able to come to conclusions that will benefit Connecticut and ensure that AI is properly regulated and not dangerous in the state of Connecticut.
And so what do you want in our last, little minute here? What would you tell people about focusing on and discussing state races? Because obviously this upcoming election is presidential. That's a huge focus. But we have so many down ballot races tomorrow as well on the ballot. And, you're a state lawmaker, one who's up for re-election. So, for you, what's your message to voters as, to what's at stake this upcoming election year? Because it's not just the White House. There's so many other seats as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot of focus and attention on the presidential race. But the truth is, the further down the ballot you go, the more direct impact a legislator or a mayor or someone else is probably going to have on your life. We pass hundreds of laws every year in the state legislature, and you want to make sure that your voice is heard on who you're selecting to help pass those laws. And I want to make sure that every person turns over that ballot. There may be additional candidates on the backside, and there will definitely be a question of whether you should support absentee voting for all. I think you should vote yes. Finally, allow us to increase access, efficiency, and security, and join these 36 other states and the District of Columbia who've implemented it successfully.
Well, Matt, thank you so much, as always, for taking the time. Unfortunately, that's all we have, but a lot of big topics here, a lot of big conversation. I'm sure we'll be talking again before Election Day, but, want to get the word out that people can head to the polls early.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. There's lots more election coverage ahead, though, and plus this morning, now 1 year after the horrific October 7th attack, people from across Connecticut are reflecting on the larger conflict that's raged on for decades and the massive toll this year of renewed warfare has had. The family of an Israeli hostage, Palestinian students, and a doctor trying to save lives have their stories next.